We've reached the end of our study of the CISG, and we're going to close it off with a thing that really, with a topic that, here, let's start all over. Let's start all over. All right. Okay, we have reached the end of our study of the CISG. But we started this section of the course talking about expectations and risks. So in this final lecture, we revisit those notions of expectations and risks, and we study how it is that the law provides the means for parties to achieve their expectations and minimize their risks. We know that international trade involves risk. And there are two broad categories of risk. There is performance risks, risks that arise from the performance of the contract. And then there are transactional risks, risks that arise out of the transaction itself. Now, we also have learned that businesses will use contracts to manage their risks. Contracts are used to allocate risk between the buyer and the seller. And previously, we've discussed risk involving performance of the obligations in a contract, performance risks. In this lecture, we look at transactional risks, the legal structures that we've created to minimize those risks. How is it that a party in Egypt can do business with a party in China? How can I, as a buyer, protect myself, make sure that I get the goods I want at the price that I agreed to pay? And how can the seller protect itself, get paid for the goods? Well, we have created legal structures that allows those types of transactions to occur. So in this lecture, we're going to be looking really not at performance risks, which we've already discussed, but transactional risks. And there are transaction risks involved in any business transaction, any commercial transaction. And essentially, when we talk about transaction risk, we're referring to the risks that the buyer and seller face when they move money and goods across long distances. Transaction risks are those risks that arise because of barriers that separate the buyer and the seller. And these barriers take different forms. There are really two types of transaction risks: delivery risk and payment risk. We'll be talking about each of those in a little bit more detail. Delivery risk is the risk to the buyer that it will not receive the goods. And payment risk is the risk to the seller that the buyer's not going to pay. So delivery risk is really a concern of the buyer. Payment risk is a concern of the seller. So how do we do that? We do that through a legal structure called the documentary sale. And I've got an animation up on D2L, and I encourage you to look at that to get an idea of how it is that the documentary sale allows the parties to a contract to manage delivery risks and payment risks. The documentary sale is called a documentary sale because it requires a document that abstracts the goods, meaning the document takes on the legal nature of the goods. The document of title is used to move goods and transfer ownership and possession of goods. And you probably already kind of have an idea of what a title is and how it works. We have titles to our vehicle. And we know that when we sell a vehicle, we must not only transfer possession, but we must transfer the title. And the reason why is the title is the formal evidence of ownership of the goods. The title is what ultimately establishes the right of ownership. If you sell me a car, but you don't give me the title, I have possession of the car, but ownership is retained by you. So when a document of title is created, it separates ownership from possession. The documentary sale is a special type of sale of goods. It's a special type of contract for the sale of goods, in which the focus of the sale is not the transfer of the goods, but the transfer of the title. Now, parties to a documentary sales transaction have goods. The seller's obligation in a documentary sale is to place the goods in the hands of a carrier. A carrier is that third party that is going to take the goods from the seller's place of business or factory and transfer them to the buyer's place of business. So a carrier could be a number of different entities along that route. The seller's obligation is to place the goods into the hands of a carrier. The buyer's obligation is to purchase the document of title, meaning the buyer must not purchase the goods, but really must purchase the actual document of title. And we use banks. We use banks in both the buyer's and seller's country to actually handle the process of exchanging a document of title for money. We often don't think of this other role that banks have. Banks have a role beyond simply loaning money and paying interest on money stored. The banking system plays a role in the transactions for the sale of goods.